And today we want to explore the topic of how education is changing, right? And let me go a little bit deeper into that. So we know modern education has been practically undisrupted, right? An undisrupted field since the Industrial Revolution, when the so-called factory model education system was implemented. And although there has been other education models created, like homeschooling or the Montessori model, or you name it, the vast majority of America still follows the traditional model, right? So I want to ask you, and I'd like to start with you, Beth. Do you think this crisis that we're living is acting as a catalyst to change your current traditional education model? And if so, how do you think the new one is going to look?
Yes, thank you, Mona, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this panel. I absolutely think, and I know my panelists will agree, that this is a good catalyst. It's a catalyst, as we've said, is happening all at once to everybody. So it can be considered a bit stressful to try to manage all of this change all at once. But I do think this is a catalyst for change in the ways that we think about education at all levels. My experience is in higher education, of course. And so I think we can build on some best practices that we've been establishing over the last 10, 15 years to think about education differently in digital environments, particularly. But I think it offers an opportunity to open up flexible pathways, is what we say at UTEP. We've been exploring opportunities to do that, and it feels like all of a sudden, every pathway has the potential to be flexible. So I think what we can do after this experience especially is evaluate what we learned this past, hopefully a year, maybe 18 months of having to think differently about how we deliver education here, and really see those opportunities where things worked well and we can continue to move forward with meeting students where they are.
Okay. Sherry, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Beth. I think right now we're kind of in the thick of things and everything seems to be happening at once. So I couldn't agree with that more. But I also see, as far as this being a catalyst for change, I also think it's a time for us to work with employers. I think as we look at curriculum and we look at building new models, we really need to look at skills. So for a long time, we've talked about competency-based education. There's a number of institutions that are doing that because we know with the traditional educational model, seat time is really not indicative of how much people actually know or how much
Mm-hmm.
they learn. And so that really needs to be changed and disrupted. But I think one of the things we really do need to look at is that skills based and having that integrated into the curriculum, having us work more closely with employers, because at the end of the day, going back to school and reimagining yourself for adult learners or for the traditional learners, it's about getting a job and it's about being participants in their communities. So I think that really is a key aspect to us changing and altering our traditional educational model.
Yeah, I agree. We're facing one of the biggest challenges, I think, in education, which is the need to start education processes that aim to develop citizens who are prepared both to live and work, like you said, in what has been called the society of information and knowledge. Really, do you have anything to add on that, Noah?
Yeah, would just like to add a point or two to what Sherry and Beth have already shared, and fully agree with what they've said. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really sort of fast forwarded many organizations to think in new and innovative ways. I think one of the things that we have already begun to see since March, when schools and school systems were starting to make changes and adapt to the environment, has been that all of these different models are exciting and at the same time hold tremendous potential, but they raise questions and present challenges as well. And these challenges come across a spectrum of different areas, and I'd highlight just a few now. There are challenges around equity, where students' capabilities to learn virtually versus in person vary tremendously. There may be individualized requirements that students have, and their ability to access or use technology. And then there's the role, the capabilities, and the availability of parents, as individuals who, depending on the age of the student, need to play perhaps a greater role. And not all parents are able to, time-wise and skill-wise and background-wise, play the same role. And so these situations really are going to challenge school systems to help students still get from point A to point B, rather than seeing students end up at point B, point C, or point D, really highlighting many of these inequities.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. In my case, I was very fortunate to have parents that were very involved, not only because they wanted to, but because they were able to with the different subjects, right? Which is not something everyone has. But I want to put a pin on that, on the ability to access, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later into depth. But thank you for that, Noah. The next question, because I feel like we're not addressing what is the new model going to look like, because that is such a complex question. But thinking about a perfect world, what would you imagine the education model looking like in this scenario? Sherry.
Thank you. I think first and foremost, we need to look at career exploration. I think one of the things that we need to work on, and at NMSU we're working on this, is being able to allow students, as they're learning, to be able to actually explore different careers. I think all of us know how many people leave education, higher education in particular, and they start a career midway through, they don't like it, or halfway through their degree program, they want to change because they're not sure. And all of that is just building up debt for our students. And that's not really transforming their lives as we want to be able to do. So I think for a model, we'd want to look at different pathways, individualized pathways where they can develop different skills, where they have career exploration in that versus just learning some of the content that they regurgitate. Because again, at the end of the day, we want them to be productive citizens of the areas that they live in. And part of that is being happy and fulfilled in the career that you're in.
Yeah, completely. That is such a great point. I know there's a lot of people that go into one career and then switch careers, or even like me, I finished 2 degrees and then switched to acting. So talk about depth right there. Noah, what I would like to hear your opinion on this.
Absolutely. So I think the educational model really needs to represent what I think of almost as a menu. And it's really an a la carte menu that students, that learners are able to select from, so that they can chart that path, to the point Sherry was making, so that they can chart that path to help them get to the workforce and to the outcomes that they desire. And those pathways need to be flexible enough, with flexible menu options, so that students are able to change course over their learning careers. I think this is something that is very difficult for schools, for K-12 public school systems, for higher education to accomplish in the way that things are currently constructed. I think that these virtual and hybrid learning models that have been getting rolled out over the last several months, and will continue to over certainly at least this academic school year that we're now entering, are going to help to test some of that and see what it looks like in practice, where there need to be able to be quick changes and quick shifts in how learning is taking place. So I think we have a lot to learn over these next number of months.
I agree. Beth, would you like to add something to that?
My goodness, Sherry and Noah said such good things. I want to cover all of it. But a couple of ideas. I think Sherry's point about career exploration and skills, and then I see a comment from Michael Rodriguez talking about needing to understand better the value of transferable skills. I've done a bit of work in that in writing studies, and my goodness, like I completely agree that that needs to be much more clearly articulated, but that's a big job to do. And it really requires a university, or at least large chunks of the university, working together in concert with one another. Perhaps this moment will give us more opportunities to, again, open up those conversations, because I think that's 100% right. I like also what Sherry said about recognizing how the work we do at a university connects or disconnects from sort of the world that they might enter to when they begin working or working in their communities. And I think recognizing too how much work has shifted with this pandemic, right? The work of going to an office like many people used to do, or going out and doing different acts or services, performances, whatever, has changed significantly as well. And I think we need to be conscious of that. You know, there's long been this argument, there's a disconnect between what the university does and then the work world out there. But what is that going to look like in 4 or 5 years from now, even? Because everything is shifting all at the same time. So it's an exciting project to tackle. And then one more thing, I think your question about what does education look like in the future, that's where I think Noah's point about a la carte makes a lot of sense. Because every university is different. We were just talking about some other universities before we went live. Some are residential, wanting to bring first-year students to campus. The campus I work at is more of a commuter school, I guess you could say, where many students are coming from the community and then leaving after they're participating on campus for the day. They're not staying there on campus. And so given that each university, college, even educational systems has its own personality, its own flavor already, there's not really one way to sort of define what education will look like. But again, I want to just echo what both panelists said, especially Noah's point about a la carte. I think we need to understand that there's going to be an audience who wants to have more opportunities and more options available to them, because now they're seeing what could be possible.
Yeah, I agree. Could you go a little bit deeper, Beth, into and if anyone wants to add to this, into the transferable skills? So if there's people in our audience who are not as familiar with the term, can you explain a little bit about that? Beth?
Oh, sure. I was waiting to see if anybody else wanted to say something. Well, in writing studies, I think we're talking about the kinds of things when you teach a first-year composition class, for example, which every student who goes to university has to take at some point. What are the kinds of things that a student needs to learn in that class, not just so that they can go on to, let's say, their engineering class or their business class or their history class, that will help them to be good communicators, but beyond that, like you said, in the community or in the work world. And then getting everyone to sort of agree on what those look like, and then build curricula around that and assessments around that. It's a really exciting project, but it's a really difficult and in-depth project. I think school systems have a better handle on this than higher education does for a variety of reasons. But then how do you translate that then to every class, right? Or every degree plan that a student goes into. And so I think it's a valuable project that we need to continue to work on, but it's not something that's done necessarily super quickly, right? It takes time and really nuanced thought to do it. I don't know if Sherry, you have some additional thoughts.
Sherry, do you have any additional thoughts to that?
Do. I mean, I agree with that. And I think one of the things is really partnering with the workforce to be able to do that. You know, for so long, we've been so separate, right? And higher education has really kind of done their own things and tried to set students up for success as best as they can. But I think organically and as we evolve, we really need to bring those folks into those conversations and work with them to really unpack what those skills are. Because as we're developing and looking at different curriculum, we can easily navigate that in there. So whether it's a credential that we automatically put within that course, whatever that may be, we can build them up so it's more than just them passing that class so that they have the prerequisite to get to their next one.
Right. And in that sense, that sounds like a lot of work, which I know in general much work has been done over the last several weeks to prepare for the reopening of our schools, right? I mean, NMSU is starting already next week on August 19th, and then UTEP on August 24th. So I want to hear from Beth and from Beth, how ready are we for a successful reopening?
Well, I think on my campus, we're pretty ready. I think we're getting there. There's a lot of faculty who have been working very hard thinking about this over the summer. We have a substantial number of faculty who already teach online or hybrid style courses. We have a great Center for Instructional Design, which I also get to work with. I've been working with them very intensely. They're working so hard since March, as I'm sure all instructional designers are. And they've been doing all they can to prepare faculty who just need a little bit of assistance or, oh my goodness, I've never done this before, where do I start kind of assistance. So I think as an institution, we were lucky that we already had an infrastructure in place. Like I've said already, not necessarily to help everyone all at once, but I think we're doing the best we can to provide that guidance and service and support as we're able to. So I think as an institution, we're pretty ready to open up the doors, both physically and virtually, on August 24th and get the students in their classes and ready to learn.
Okay. Noah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. So I think that institutions within the higher ed segment and then the K-12 school systems are all doing everything they can to prepare and to reopen, I will say, in whatever format that looks like. I think that where I'll only sort of dip my toe and where I think none of us can claim to be an expert is sort of gazing into this crystal ball of, what does the outlook really look like for the COVID-19 pandemic. There have unfortunately already been many instances where schools have reopened physically and have done so with very unfortunate circumstances of illness and spreading of COVID-19. And I think that that's been taking place at the K-12 level. The coming weeks and months are going to be a real test across colleges and universities, where obviously students for some institutions are coming from only nearby areas, and for others are coming from all 50 states and abroad. And so I think it's going to be a real test for these institutions as far as how they are operationally able to execute on plans and create a safe environment. That being said, I think instructors are doing tremendous work in creating flexible content and leveraging different curriculum models, and taking advantage of so much of the innovative education technology solutions that are available in the market. And some of those are really traditional subject-based. Some of those are more skill-focused that are allowing instructors in schools to do terrific things. But back to the sort of original question of how I'm hearing it, are we ready for a successful reopening? I think that's something that only time is going to tell as we sort of see how things march forward.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Time will teach us many valuable lessons. Sherry, in the case of NMSU, will classes be offered in person, online, or through a hybrid model?
All of the above. So we really prepared so that we're there for our students and we meet our students' needs. And so we're opening and have it when we have face-to-face, online, we have high flex and hybrid.
Okay. What about in the case of UTEP, Beth?
Yes, very much what Sherry just described. We reached out to faculty as early as we could as we were starting to rethink the fall schedule and asked them, what was the best way to deliver their course pedagogically. We wanted faculty to have the agency to make those decisions up front. And of course, there were some changes and shifts, throughout the summer as different things came to the surface. But for the most part, faculty had a very strong voice in how they wanted to approach this. And then we've been working with them, based on those choices. And so the majority of them will be teaching a class online, but there will be a good number, maybe a quarter or so of classes that have some on-campus experience, maybe, labs especially, and then another variety of courses where that seemed to be important to the discipline.
All right, Noah, what are you hearing about this? What are your thoughts on this?
So let me speak to the K-12 level, which looks at the students a few years before what Sherry and Beth were just pointing to, and at the K-12 level, I think educators are seeing tremendous challenges in terms of their desire to deliver the best quality educational experience and how to do it safely, and also how to manage what that translates to in terms of the burdens for educators and for the facilities in general. And this is something that has become unfortunately a very political issue in many parts of the country, in many states, where there is considerable disagreement and friction between parents and school systems, between teachers and school systems, between unions and government agencies. And I think there are some places where folks are not losing sight of the end goal being, how do we really deliver a safe quality education to the students? But that's something that unfortunately has been a big challenge. And so I think we're seeing models for delivery across the map, from fully online, with certain major districts in the country having already made a commitment to be fully online for K-12 up through the end of January, so for the full first semester of the school year, and others experimenting with being fully in person from day one, which is already behind us, and everything really in between. So thank you for that question.
Well, with that in mind, Noah, I'd like to ask you, as you think ahead during this crisis, because you have brought the subject of time a couple times now, I would like you to discuss the myriad of scenarios playing out as we prepare for the fall semester.
Absolutely. So this is, I think, a terrific question. I appreciate you raising it. And, as I think about it, I would say, sort of think about this as a headline to answer it. What schools start with in August or September may very well need to evolve, and perhaps very quickly, as COVID-19 required in the spring months. I think that as we are preparing, what schools are going to have to keep in mind is that they are going to have to be able to change course on the turn of a dime. And they may need to do that once, twice, 3 times. And they're going to have to be very flexible, and there are going to be different reasons for it as well. We're going to see cases where teachers become sick, unfortunately, and where the schools simply can't staff in order to teach the students the way they have modeled it and the way they've communicated it. There will be cases where schools need to go temporarily online because of infected students and the requirement to quarantine and isolate people. And these things are going to see sort of ups and downs, and it's going to be almost like light switches flipping on and off, as I expect we will see them take place over these next several months. So I think flexibility is really what I see as being the key theme that's going to have to be present um, as schools navigate through these scenarios. And that'll be the case for K-12 as well as higher ed. I do think in higher ed, it perhaps becomes a little bit more difficult to simply flip back and forth between models when there are institutions that have students residing on campus. And so, making changes to one model and then to another and then to yet another may be a little bit trickier, but certainly in K-12 where you're dealing with a tightly controlled with one community, that flexibility is that much more important and relevant.
Yeah, so the key takeaway here is flexibility. What is your take on that, Beth?
Yeah, flexibility is one of those words I wanted to make sure I mentioned today. So no, you beat me to that. But I think flexibility is absolutely going to be flexibility and patience, right? Patience with whatever challenges pop up in front of us. We just released at UTEP a document to provide guidance for faculty in any scenario. Well, not any scenario because we can't imagine all the scenarios, but at least as we start this semester, what all classes need to do, what face-to-face classes need to be mindful of, what online classes need to be mindful of. And there's just so many details to think through right now, which is why this document took us, I don't know how many revisions, I don't know, I'm going to guess like 25, maybe 30 revisions, because so many people needed to be involved in the conversation. It feels in some ways there's just a lot of control around the educational experience right now that some people may not be fully comfortable with, but then we have to account, just like Noah said, for these possibilities that, what do I do in this situation when a student refuses to wear the face mask if my university requires them to do so, right? Like, what are all these contingency plans that we have to think through and provide guidance on? So I think we're trying to do that with the best spirit possible to not make it seem controlling and like a legal sort of, guidance. This is the best we can do in this learning environment to make it a positive learning environment. If we plan ahead, then perhaps we can focus on the flexibility and the patience of moving everyone through. And yeah, same guidance is what we're giving. Be prepared if your class has a face-to-face component now. Within 48 hours, you may be having to put it back into an online situation because we just simply don't know what will happen. I'll just say too, we were talking about sending kids off to college in the next couple of weeks too. Noah and I hope it's okay for me to say this, both have students who'll be first-year students at another campus. And I'm just telling mine, be prepared for you to see me again in 5 weeks, just in case, right? I'm gonna pick you up and bring you home again. And I think these kids who went through their senior years like this recognize anything is possible, right? I hate to see that happen for them, but I think they understand too going into this that flexibility is important from the student perspective as well.
Yeah, completely. Flexibility, especially like you said, going from one model to the other or the hybrid model. However, I think there are some barriers to implementing effective remote learning for all students. And I would like to hear your take on that, Sherry.
Sure. I think one of the barriers we need to first and foremost get over is the idea that online education is not as rigorous or as high quality as face-to-face. Online education has been around for such a long time. I've been doing it for a long time as well. And, we've been researching this. And really what the research says is the hybrid model is the most effective. And so as we're in this pandemic, I think it's a really great opportunity to see how the students are actually obtaining those learning objectives as well. So I see that as really kind of that first barrier that we need to get over. So just that mindset, which I think it's really forcing some folks into that this pandemic has. And I think secondly is the pedagogical strategies. And so when you look at developing a face-to-face class, it's very different than building an online class. And so
Completely.
so we really need to work at knowing what those pedagogical strategies are for the online learner. It's a lot more intentional. There's a lot more work up front when you're developing and designing those courses or programs. And I think that really is our first step in removing the barriers that we currently face.
All right.
I just say I agree completely.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Beth, if you have anything to add.
Well, Sherry said it really well. I'll just say too, again, going back to the importance of having that pedagogical guidance, and every discipline is different in the face-to-face classroom. And so every discipline will have some differences in the online environment as well. But just as Sherry said, it's very intentional. Communication needs to be so clear in an online environment because you lack some of those other nuances that you get in a face-to-face environment. So making sure that there's that communication and support that faculty can get from someone on campus or even someone off campus to help them develop an engaging course so that students don't feel disconnected from the course, as well as one that really tracks, what are the goals of the course, how is the learning going to be achieved, and then how is ultimately going to be assessed to and whatever that means, right? Because every discipline is again different, to make sure that the students achieve those learning goals.
All right. Noah, what do you think on this?
So I had noticed a couple of questions coming in, pardon me, that sort of speak to questions around access to technology, usability of technology. I think there was a question about access to Wi-Fi and support of students. I think, all of these questions are really concentrate around this issue of equity among students, and where there are different barriers. One is, and I think probably the easier for us to succeed with, is online education, as Sherry has said, as Beth has mentioned, has a long history of success and has been shown to be a great medium for delivering content. Where some of the challenges come in is when it comes to receiving and digesting the content, where, especially in this day and age, and the world we're operating in right now, not every student is going to have the same home environment to learn in, and not every student will have access to the same systems and same really know-how, and I'll call it in-house support, if you will, to help them navigate the technology. And so I think schools at the K-12 level, higher ed as well, are going to need to provide some of those additional supports to make sure that students actually have the tools that they need. And it's going to require a lot of communication between the schools and the students to make sure that their technology, their learning environment, is able to give them what they need to be successful, and where it's not, to figure out what the potential adjustments are that can be made to help them be successful learners.
Yeah, completely. I want to make a little pause here, and I see there's a lot of questions coming from the audience, which is great. If we have time at the end of this, we're going to try and cover it. If we don't cover them in the discussion that we're having right now, but talking about this barriers, both the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the UNESCO's 2030 Education Agenda place both connectivity and digital literacy as part of their goals. I personally know an edtech startup, for example, who's named The Pill, who's specifically tackling the subject of connectivity in e-learning, which I think is huge. It's a huge problem or challenge to overcome. So in your opinion, how big of an issue is connectivity and digital literacy to effective learning, both in our region and nationally? And what do you think are some of the solutions for that? I'm going to start with Sherry.
I think, well, I grew up in a rural town as well. And even today we have issues with connectivity. in that part of the United States as well. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is as we design instruction, how can we do that on mobile devices? How can we do that in different type of settings so that there is an equal opportunity to learn throughout? Because a lot of the rural areas struggle. When I was in Oklahoma working for the Department of Mental Health, we struggled with that as well, right? So we had the rural facilities that weren't able to take all the trainings online as the inner city was. So I think really partnering with our economic development organizations within each of our states is really going to be key for that. And I think that's also just for the growth of our state, especially in New Mexico and Texas.
All right. Beth, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what Sherry said makes perfect sense. I'm going to steal a story from another institution that I heard earlier in the summer about when the students were all sent home super quickly, and then maybe they were given an extra week to kind of let the faculty adjust their course delivery to a remote setting. But there was someone who went to a rural location, lives on a ranch somewhere in Texas, and claimed that he had to climb to the top of the water tower in order to be able to get the Wi-Fi to be consistent enough for him to submit his work or to participate in class in some ways. So I think, to Sherry's point, being very conscious of the variety of experiences, and Noah has said this several times already too, that our students may be in based on the region that they live in, the home they live in, a variety of different situations. So at UTEP, and I'm sure at other universities, I know at other universities, I'm sure at NMSU as well, we were able to use some of the federal funding we received, the CARES Act funding, to provide technology to students who expressed a need for it. And that included hotspots to allow them to connect as needed. But I think one other important point, just as Sherry said, about designing courses in such a way that access is as equitable as possible, is to limit the amount of time we expect them to be on screen at a very certain time, a very specific time. I know at UTEP, we almost always say the best online classes are asynchronous classes. And those are for the students who want to take an online class, right? Because then they have the opportunity to complete that course at any time. If they're across different time zones, they have that option. I mean, they don't have to come, at a very specific time, sometimes in the middle of the night if they're on the other side of the world. Conversation has been renewed, whether or not synchronous versus asynchronous is such a hard line, and we're opening up some different possibilities of how to do that. Again, I think it's very dependent on the character, the personality of that particular campus, whether or not that will work. The kind of class that's being taught, maybe a graduate class could be more successful in a synchronous format, where large political science courses that have 500 students and you don't want them all trying to participate synchronously at the same time. So again, it's giving us an opportunity to really unpack some of these assumptions and think about the best ways to not only provide the pedagogy of the class, but also the accessibility of the course.
Yeah, I'm reading flexibility here all over again.
Yes.
Correct. I want to also say, for example, at STTE, we're doing the TIES program, which has given devices to students that also express the need for them. Because it's very easy to think we're going to go from a physical presence classroom to just an online classroom and just assume that everybody has the same devices and the same connectivity, when that is not the case. I know, and still in America, there is a lot of homes that don't have either the devices nor the connectivity. So tackling that and thinking about that, like you said, that, and how you design the courses, I think is huge for transforming education in this time.
I would just add quickly too, understanding too that faculty who are very good at lecturing for an hour and a half to a 200-person class, that doesn't always translate to the online environment. There's so many more distractions. There's so many details to think about with the technology is regarded and so on. So yeah, I think I just echo what you just said, Mara, is really having to adapt and be flexible to what we're used to.
Yeah, completely. Because also the energy and the presence of people doesn't translate the same in the screen. So I think that too. And then also I read someone on the question said fully staffed tech support call centers are needed. Also, for that is sometimes challenging for educators who have been accustomed to giving classes in a particular way, to now change everything to the digital era. So that, I think, is also has to be taken into consideration. And that matter, I would like to know, how can we help teachers deliver equality remote learning that serves all students, with a focus on the challenges facing students from low-income families. Sherry, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I think the very first thing is having wraparound services, especially for our low income first generation students. I think one of the things we have to remember is that a lot of the things that kids were able to get from their parents or their siblings that have went to school in the past, or are familiar with the university system or education system, is they know how to navigate it, right? And what the low income household needs is someone to believe in them. This is a group of students who needs more structure, and you need to hold them accountable. And I think that's a misconception a lot with the low socioeconomic student, is to give them more flexibility. This is not the population to necessarily do that with. They want to be held accountable, because part of that is telling them that you care about them and that you want them to succeed. And so it's a little different model with this group. And I also think the other thing to remember is that they have competing priorities as well, that other students, whether it's having to work to help pay for things at home that they have to navigate as well. And then the last thing I would add to that is, for these students, a lot of times they enter education and they think they know less than their peers. But the truth of the matter is that they have life experiences that many students or many people don't ever experience till they're in their 30s or 40s. So for me, what I want to be able to see in our curriculum, and especially for the low socioeconomic students, is that as educators and people in these positions, telling them and showing them that we know where they come from. Some of us have been in their situations before and made it out, which is a positive thing. But we need to add something in the curriculum where it's not so cookie cutter, it's not so traditional. It's going, when we talk about equity and inclusion, that's where the inclusive piece comes in, right? Is that we need to build that within the curriculum so that they know we understand them.
Yeah. Beth, what are your thoughts on that? How can we help teachers deliver quality remote learning, especially in low-income families?
Well, to piggyback again on what Sherry said, a lot of us know this is an asset-based approach, right? So looking at all the things that Sherry just mentioned that students might bring to the classroom, instead of seeing them as, English isn't their first language, guess what? They're bilingual. And that is a huge advantage over so many other students who may not be so. And so how do we kind of identify those strengths? And then, as Sherry said, use them to the student's advantage, or not use them to the student's advantage, but help the students understand why they're an advantage, and then to make good use of those themselves in the future. Otherwise, I think access continues to be a challenge. I know many campuses who are relatively closed are still keeping computer labs open. I think there are different places in the cities that are trying to, like libraries and YMCAs and YWCAs, who are trying to provide some computer access to students at all levels who need that. So I think that's a good area where others in the community can help to make sure this is a more successful experience. And then I think the good work that campuses are already doing and providing the tech support that they can, providing instructional support that they can, there needs to be more of that. I mean, everybody's working as hard as they can and trying to look cool on the surface, but paddling as hard as, and fast underneath of it. But I would love if there was more resources available to expand those, so that every faculty who wanted assistance got as much assistance as they wanted. I think that would be fantastic as well.
I think you just answered my next question. So I'm going to turn it on to Noah. What do you think? What does the next steps are needed to be taken to ensure that all our teachers have the needed support to continue effectively educating students?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Mara. I think one of the most important things that we need to be doing, pardon me, for our teachers is actually getting their opinion and getting their feedback on a regular basis to understand what their experiences truly look like, where they are able to be successful, and where they are seeing challenges, so that we are able to, in a very timely manner, provide additional support, change course, and help them advocate for themselves. I think figuring out the right mechanisms to collect teacher feedback and surveying them will be very important, because everybody is going into uncharted waters. Even if the teachers began with these experiences back in March, it is still a new place for many. And I think that for many schools, a big difference between virtual or hybrid learning now or in September and what it was in March or April was that for many students and many families, the expectations have increased. They've gone way, way up. Because in March, there was a pretty respectable amount of understanding that this came out of nowhere, and we understand that you're not ready for it, and we can sort of give you that flexibility and that time to sort of get things moving properly. However, for this new school year, I think there are many who have expectations that it began in March. There were 3 months left to the last academic year. There's been a summer of several months, and things should look perfect now, and it should be a great educational experience. So I think surveying the teachers is very important. And then on the flip side, in order for the teachers to be successful, the school systems need to be surveying and getting an understanding from the students and their families about what they are actually experiencing, so that we make sure that the teachers and the students and families are on the same page, and that there is an agreed upon understanding, and all know what each other is experiencing through the way the education is being delivered. And then the one other piece related to both of those points is that there has already become an increased awareness and emphasis on mental health issues throughout the country and worldwide. I think the different forms of social interaction and engagement, in many cases, the more limited socialization that's taking place, is creating challenges for many students and perhaps educators as well. And so this needs to be something that the university administrators, that K-12 school administrators are understanding, aware of, and providing the supports to be able to address in a timely manner to keep our students and educators safe and happy.
I'm so glad you addressed that, because I see a couple of questions already from the audience on mental health and what are we doing to address that in this new order of things. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Sherry or Beth.
Sure. One of the things that we're doing at NMSU is we're offering those as online services. So we have the ability for students to have counseling sessions, so telehealth, and we have that available. And not only for our students, but the other group I want to mention is for our faculty. This is very different and new for them, and I think we need to be empathetic and to empathize with them with what they're also having to go through, and be there for them as a support system.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's sometimes it's difficult to kind of find your place in your job, and when you finally think you have, and then everything changes, it can be very challenging, and you can feel out of place. So this is definitely something important to take into account, not only for students, but for faculty and for administrators as well, I think. Beth, do you want to add anything on the mental health issue?
Sure. I think that this issue and many other sort of student support issues are really, this is an opportunity again for them to rethink a lot of the work that they do and how they do it. For UTEP Connect, our fully online degree programs, or any school that has fully online degree programs, I think they've been thinking for a few years about how to translate that on-campus support system to an online environment for students who may not even be in the area to come to campus and sit with a counselor. And so I know at UTEP we've been thinking through and fine-tuning this for a couple of years or more, but now here it is, right? There's going to be many students who need access to this service, and I'm seeing a lot of creativity and a lot of just dedication to making sure that students have that support that they need when they request it. And to your point, I think faculty, we forget, right, sometimes that we need to give them the moment to pause and think and reflect. And I think Noah's advice is absolutely perfect. When we help to launch an online course with a faculty member, we try to follow up with them the next week and say, how's it going? Are you experiencing any issues? How does it feel? That sort of thing. And I think we need to do that across the board, no matter what kind of course faculty are trying to teach. I know that's a heavy lift, and we need to figure out a way to do that well, because the last thing we want is for faculty to respond to that and then no one follows up, right?
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that that communication is constant as much as possible throughout the semester, whether it's at an individual level or department level or across the whole university, but attending to exactly those kinds of challenges and concerns.
Yeah, that's a titanic effort for sure. Noah, what do you think are the education solutions needed to succeed this fall?
That's a great question. Once again, I think, I'm going to answer it by saying what the solutions need to prioritize versus exactly what those solutions are. And I think the education solutions that are going to allow for success for teachers and for students are going to be the ones that prioritize safety, equity, engagement, and then effectiveness monitoring. And I know I've spoken to some of these during the course of the conversation today, and I know Sherry and Beth have as well. Safety, I think, obviously speaks for itself. Equity equity is something that is of such great importance through so many lenses, ranging from the technology to different student learning needs. And so that's something that will be very challenging and will require a lot of constant sort of care, attention, and focus and refocus by educators, students, and their families. And I think, Beth, I believe you had mentioned it, engagement, right? I mean, figuring out how to create different flavors, if you will, of the content, of the simulations, of the delivery, so that students can remain engaged. And this is, I think, going to be a challenge from K-12 up through higher education. And it may actually be something that's a greater challenge at the K-12 level, where you have certain models being rolled out for the fall, where a student would be online for 3 straight hours, or for 4 or for 5 straight hours. And how do you create the variety and the engagement other than perhaps shifting from science to English to math? It's still the same screen. And so figuring out how to create the nuanced delivery and engage students, that's going to be a big priority for solutions to be successful. So thank you for raising that.
All right. I just want to let you know this is our last question. If you have anything else to add, Noah, to close as a conclusion to the panel, this would be the moment to do it. If not, then I'm going to go. Yeah, do you?
I was going to say I want to be respectful. I just spoke for a few minutes, so let me sort of open things to Sherry and Beth. All
right, thank you. Sherry?
Yeah, I actually think there's 3 parts to being successful for the fall. I think the very first thing that we need to look at is being intentional about our design and our delivery of our curriculum, not only for, again, the students, because that's who we want to be successful, but also for our faculty member as well. And I would also say the second thing is looking at that social cognitive space, right? And so that is such a key piece to learning. It's why a lot of students come to face-to-face classrooms, is so that there's an interaction with their peers. They're learning from each other, but also from students to faculty. And with that, we have this digital divide that we need to really think through, and how we can still create that space for them. And it goes back to that intentionality when you're designing and developing instruction. So that's a key piece, because we don't want our students to feel like they're all alone. They could go take a MOOC if that was the case, right? And earn their credentials that way. They want to learn from the world-class faculty that we have. And I know our faculty at NMSU, they want that with their students as well. And then I think the last thing is making sure as an institution, we continue to support our faculty. So in closing, with what I would say is, for us at NMSU, one of the things that we've done to give folks on this call a practical offering is that we've created open labs, so that faculty can call in, 8 to 5, anytime. They can jump online with any of our academic technologists or our instructional designers and get that just-in-time feedback as they're looking at their curriculum. And it has worked really well for us, and it's a way for us to just continually support our faculty.
Good, great. That's great. Beth, do you want to add something to that last question and wrap up?
It's really difficult, I think, to add much to what Noah and Sherry both said, but I think I'll just go back to engagement. I think that's really key to so many of the pieces that we're talking about here. Making sure that students have the opportunity to engage with the content of their course, with the instructor of the course, and then with each other. So don't think of it as a transactional, like an online course as a transactional opportunity, but one where all of those engagements are built in as much as possible. And when I've had opportunities to talk to our UTEP faculty or faculty to other institutions, a lot of time I end up saying, what makes you a good teacher in the face-to-face classroom, remember that first. Like, what is that first? Make a list, right? What are the things you're doing really well? How can you put those in in an online environment? Because many of them can translate. They might not look exactly the same, but you still have those strengths, you still have those skill sets, you still have that wonderful presence with your students. How do you translate that into an online environment? So I think putting those things top of mind are really helpful and make this transition seem perhaps a bit less daunting.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Beth. Unfortunately, we're running out of time and we don't have time to answer all of your questions from the audience. Thank you again, Beth, Sherry, and Noah, for being here today with us and sharing all those years of experience and vast knowledge with us. It has surely been a treat for me listening to you. I know for the rest of the audience as well. I want to thank again the Council on Regional Economic Expansion and Educational Development for their continued support of STTE. And a very, very special thank you to the members of the audience here today. Again, I apologize, we did not have the time to go over your questions, but if you found this information useful, I'd be happy to make you please consider liking our social media pages or sharing it with someone you think might benefit from this, and following STTE on social media, as we will be announcing our next E-Series panel to continue the discussion, and then maybe some of those questions that you had today will be answered on the next panel very soon. So this is all for today. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.